apologies from Chris Johnson and from Laura Blumenthal, and Alison Swaddle is online for Laura, and Caroline is here as a sub for Chris.
Yeah, thank you. I was just trying to think how I suppose. Okay, minutes of the previous meeting. Do we have any issues or concerns about the minutes of the previous meeting? No? Can I take a vote on that, please? Approve? Yeah, that's passed. Declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? No. Any public questions?
No public questions and no member questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the first item, which is the shareholder committee. So I'll hand that over to Stephen.
Thank you, Pete. I'll introduce this item, but Simon's on the call, and I'm sure if there's any technical questions anyone wants to ask that I'm ill-equipped to answer, Simon will be able to provide an answer. This report's before you, and it recommends a change to our current arrangements. You probably, or some of you may not be familiar with the current arrangements. We have a number of local authority wholly owned housing companies, and currently executive members sit on the boards of those companies alongside other directors. We asked for a review of the council-owned housing companies earlier this year, this municipal year, and that review was undertaken by an independent advisory body. They come out with what is called the Altair report, and the Altair report suggested that it was wise and important to allow the housing companies to function to best effect for the council, and that the best way to do this was to make some changes to the governance arrangements. And it's those changes to the governance arrangements we're looking at this evening. You'll see from the report what the structure is now going to be, or is proposed to be. There will no longer be executive members on the boards as directors of the companies, but there will be an overseeing, monitoring and strategic direction giving shareholder committee, which would be a subcommittee of the executive. During the course of discussions about this, it was decided that it was important that the opposition should be given an opportunity to be involved in this process. So the report, as you can see, the report going up to the executive, makes provision for an opposition member to be on this committee, even though it's a subcommittee of the executive. That necessarily means they have to be on as a non-voting member, but they would be there and able to participate in the meetings and report back, presumably, to the opposition group on what was happening. And that, I think, actually represents quite an improvement in terms of transparency on what we currently have. I think the advantage is primarily, I know there's a case on the other side for continuing with the current arrangement, but I think the case for changing in the way that's recommended here is that it will bring certain clear advantages. I think, first of all, and this became apparent in the discussions with board members during the course of this last year, there was some concern amongst non-councillors on the boards that the executive members, the turnover of executive members was quite rapid. It was clearly related to changes in political leadership at the council, not just from one group to another, but within a group there might be change of leaders. Therefore, there might be different directors in place. They didn't stay in place for very long. And that turnover was, in the view of the non-elected members of the boards, creating unnecessary instability and uncertainty about direction of travel. This change would also free up space on the boards for more specialists in housing, This is quite a specialist area where the appropriate knowledge is important. And it allows elected members, I think, through this new mechanism of the shareholder committee, to set the direction, oversee and monitor progress, but not get bogged down in the operational matters that frequently come up in board meetings. So I think it could provide the opportunity for the companies to flourish and actually better serve the objectives of the council, but it would give the council the mechanism for ensuring that the companies were operating in the appropriate way. So I don't know whether there's anything you want to add to that, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Well, thank you, Stephen. I think as members will see, I wasn't the author or the lead officer of the report. It's been driven by council officers, but what it would be reasonable to say to the committee is that the local housing companies offers a compliment, are certainly supportive of the proposal to move to a shareholder committee arrangement. I think it's important to stress, and Stephen's touched on it, but I'll say it again, the accountability, as far as I'm concerned, to the council doesn't change as a result of this arrangement. Presently, the holdco, the holding company, oversees the activities of the housing company, but again, that still involves elected members. And I think with this, it's quite clear. It was said at the scrutiny in January that this is quite common practice, where shareholder committees are established to oversee housing or local authority-owned companies per se. And certainly it's the view of the housing company that we will be fully engaged with the council, as we have been over the recent past, in attempting to support and deliver principally on affordable housing within Wokingham, and the proposals to change really don't alter by a result of the introduction potentially of a shareholder committee. I think the other thing to say is that, and it's clear in the report, the strategic direction and the performance monitoring is clearly within the remit of the shareholder committee. And I would want to reassure members that that accountability and possibly a twice yearly visit to the shareholder committee would be a very, very high commitment, and something that the housing company would want to do. Since I assumed the role as MD, I've been at pains to reset the arrangement with the council and reassure the council that the housing company is part of it, 100% wholly owned by the council, and therefore we should be compliant and working towards the agenda that the council has with regard to its housing offer within Wokingham. Thank you.
You finished there? Okay. Pauline.
I've said this before, but I'll say it again anyway. I think we're fundamentally getting mixed up between the role of an executive director and the role of a non-executive director. If I quote from the roles of a non-executive director, it's to provide objective and independent advice to the board and enable it to make better decisions in the interests of the stakeholders and shareholders. That is best done by somebody who is not an executive manager of the company, who has independent knowledge, not necessarily in the housing field, in general, about risk and about how to run companies. I don't understand with the shareholder board how the shareholder board will actually have any influence whatsoever on the companies. I'd like to understand how, when the company directors who are actually running the company disagree with the shareholder board, what happens? How in future we're going to represent the interests of shareholders and stakeholders if all the boards of the company don't represent them at all. That if you're a non-exec director, you're also meant to evaluate the performance of the management team, you're meant to set a remuneration, and you're meant to do appointments. And all of this seems to me being given away, if I understand this correctly. I think it's a fundamentally incorrect move, and I'm really concerned that by doing this, the council will lose control of the companies. I mean, I've been a director of the housing company at one point. It's very important, I think, to get independent advice and independent management involvement in the boards, not just have the people that are running the company there. To cover the other point which was made about the changes in directors being destabilising, when we ran the companies, we didn't change the directors all the time. We had very much the same directors, regardless of who the exec members were. The key thing is to have people that actually understand how to run a company, not somebody who happens to be executive director or executive councillor responsible for a particular area. There's no obligation to have the executive councillors, and there's no obligation to move them around all the time. You can have whoever you want as a director of the company. So that's my main concern about this, is the lack of ability of the council to actually influence with the decisions that are being made, and also the lack of ability to make sure that the companies are operating in the best interests of the stakeholders, which is the residents and the shareholders.
Thank you for that, Pauline. I know you're not in favour of this. I think you've made that fairly clear already, and that you've made it even more clear this evening. So it's good to hear your views on it. I don't take the same view. I do believe the shareholder committee can serve an equally valuable purpose in holding the company to account, holding the boards to account, and setting direction of travel, giving that strategic direction that we want. I think the evidence, I'm afraid, that we heard from the non-councillor directors was that they felt elected councillors sitting on the boards created instability and uncertainty. They were never really very clear about what the role of these elected members on the board was. There were times when there were more elected members on the board than there were unelected members, and that seemed to lead to uncertainty about what was going to happen. I don't think it was working quite as smoothly before as you think. That's certainly not the view of the people involved latterly. I don't know whether it started off very well. I quite probably did, but we've talked with the existing directors, and they do not feel it's run very well in the recent past, and they welcome this change. It's also important to say that this is not an unusual setup. This is the norm. What is unusual is the way that we've run it. And this is an independent review. The Altair report is based on independent judgment of experts in the field who feel that this is the best way forward.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. I recognise we're never going to agree on this. I've been involved in FTSE 100 boards quite a lot. What I'm saying is quite standard in terms of company boards. Maybe council boards are different. It's possible, but I don't see why. I think the external viewpoint of risk and of a wider way of running companies is useful in a board. Certainly when I was on the board of one of the housing companies, we pushed a lot more rigour in terms of business cases and in terms of evaluation of investment and that sort of stuff, which the board hadn't been doing. So that sort of independent check and balance, I think, is really important. And I understand what you're saying. I understand we're probably never going to agree. But I'd like to understand, if you go in this direction, how you think you're going to control the company if they decide to do something that you do not like as a shareholder.
Well, the shareholders are the owners of the company. We have ultimate authority. That shareholder committee has ultimate authority.
So tell me how you would do it. So your board of governors decides to go and sell 5,000 houses that you've built in the open market for commercial sales. And you're a shareholder representing the council and you don't think that's in the best interest of the residents. What would you do?
Well, I don't think a decision of that magnitude would be made without consulting the shareholder committee. But
what would you actually do? You're not a director. How do you I suppose the only thing you could do is have an AGM and sack the board, probably.
Well, indeed, you could do that if you wanted to do that, but I would hope you'd resolve that very simply by discussing with the managing director the way forward. And if this was something that ran counter to the strategic direction that the shareholder committee had set, then it would be necessary for the board to change direction to comply with the strategic direction that had been set by the shareholder committee.
I'll just interrupt you there, Pauline. 3.4, last point, says directing the board of a subsidiary to take or refrain from taking a particular action. So I think that covers the point you mentioned there.
No, it doesn't. It says that they're directing. It doesn't say how the bits of the machine are connected to each other and what control they've actually got, short of the nuclear one of getting rid of the board, which is the one you probably wouldn't want to do.
No, that would not be a desirable outcome if it could be avoided. And I think it would be avoided because my confidence is that if we set a clear strategic direction, we're asking the companies to meet our objectives. If it becomes apparent they're doing things that don't meet those objectives, we would want to discuss seriously with them about how they're going to bring their operations into line with our strategic objectives.
I'll just bring Simon online because he's got his hand up.
Yeah, I'd like to reassure members at Scrutiny that there is a hierarchy, if you like, of meetings, not overly bureaucratic, but sufficient safeguards within the existing arrangements whereby the housing companies cannot do anything without the council's acknowledgement, input, agreement. The memorandum of agreement, which is referred to in the report, is obviously to be refined and worked up in detail, but it is not the local housing company's intention that we somehow break away, make maverick decisions, don't comply with what the council are wanting to do. And I hope I'd made that point clear earlier. Even though you have non-exec directors, as you were saying, Pauline, their function's been really helpful in bringing an independent view of the housing sector to the board. But they understand that we are a wholly owned company of the council, and therefore will be working hand in glove with the council in delivering its objectives around affordable housing within Wokingham. Thank you.
Okay, I'll pass on to Charles.
Thank you. Sorry, excuse me. 3 questions, if I may. To deal with the first one first, a very simple one. You've mentioned this Altair report. Who wrote it? Who paid for it? And I note it's not in the pack. Is it possible that members of this committee could see it?
Well, I can answer the first one, or the last one first. Yes, I think it is in the public arena. It's been shared, I thought. Simon, are you able to cast some light on that?
Yes, somewhat embarrassingly, you received the report at the last scrutiny committee. And that prompted this meeting here to talk about the shareholder committee.
Okay, so we're talking about that report. Who wrote it and who paid for it?
Yeah, well, it was written by a group of housing professionals. They have a website, Altair, who are specialists in housing advice, have a lot of experience and a firm track record, a successful track record of being able to advise housing companies and councils, commissioned by the council and paid for by the companies and the council jointly.
Okay, thank you. So that answers that one. One point I had here was basically the shareholder committee will meet 3 times a year or more frequently if required, is what it says. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but my interpretation of that was the shareholder committee would be discussing all of the companies at this meeting. Therefore, you've got a meeting of perhaps 2 hours, maybe 2.5 hours, where there's maybe half an hour, 40 minutes focus on 4 months' performance of each company. Is that the structure? Is that what's proposed here?
Well, obviously the details of how the meetings will function have not yet been decided, but something along those lines. But it is worth remembering these companies, although they're separate entities, have different functions and they deal with different things. Otherwise, there would be very little point in having so many of them. And I think there will be times when we need to focus on one company more than others. So it may not be that there's going to be an equal distribution of time given to each of the companies in the meetings. It's very difficult to predict at this stage.
No, of course, and there'll be events with one particular one which dictate more time. I understand and I get that, and that's logical. I think the reason I ask that is I just don't think that's enough scrutiny, basically, or enough time or enough quality to go into this. If I was a member of that group and I'm being asked to review the accounts and strategic report of where the company is going, and then be able to ask questions of the people who are at it to interrogate the detail, I think, I mean, I'm trying to be open-minded about this. My natural predication is against it, as I said at this meeting, but I'm trying to be open-minded. And I think, you know, if I'm being fair and objective, you'd need a two-hour meeting to go into each of these separately and discuss it properly. And I'd welcome, please, all Simon's comments on that.
Well, I'm sure Simon will have something he wants to say on this, but my immediate response would be that it's pretty clear there's scope for many more meetings than 3 if those are required. And I would envisage, initially at least, there would need to be more than 3.
Okay, Simon?
Thank you, Chair. I would imagine that it's somewhere in between that. At present, if I was to give the example of how it works at the moment, we set aside 3 hours every other month, every second month, to go through the business of Loddon Homes for the first hour, Berrybrook Homes the last hour, but in the middle hour, we spend 60 minutes discussing common purpose issues that apply to both companies, and it works very effectively. As I said earlier on, principally, the shareholder committee would be looking at the strategic side of the business plans, etc., what the business is up to, and setting that direction, monitoring the compliance around that. The performance monitoring information, whoever is a member of the shareholder committee, I would expect could receive that information in between time as regularly as we produce it as far as the board. We do all the things that the council do these days in terms of budget monitoring, the way the trading position is highlighted and identified by the companies. And I see it as a matter of routine. So whilst I wouldn't like to say what time we spend on it, I wouldn't envisage that it would take an infinite amount of time for us to cover the business of the housing companies once we got in the swing of how the shareholder committee worked, because it'll be a very transparent process. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Final comment from me, basically. I mean, I'm perhaps scarred by experience when I joined this council of being on the board for Optilis, which at the time had a structure not exactly the same as this, but similar, where there was a shareholder board, and I was one of 3 councillors on that. And management came along, did big presentations to us. We got the opportunity to ask about 2-3 questions, and then it was see you in 6 months. I then later on became the lead member for adult services at the same time that Matt Pope was appointed as director. And it was a continual we wanted to change the strategy of Optilis. And it was a continual source of frustration to us that the chairman and chief exec of Optilis did not want this, lobbied against us behind our back and tried to be as obstructive as possible. And it was only when they were removed from the equation that the current governance was set up, which you'll be in a better place to comment than me on how it's functioned recently, but from my experience of 12 months in the role, worked much, much better and was able to align that company with the council's strategic priorities in terms of using Optilis to hedge against the market, which it never was before. I realise the housing companies are different, and I hear that, but you know, I'm willing to listen, basically, but naturally I do have real reservations about this.
Well, I appreciate your open-mindedness about it. I think it's the first point to make is, of course, Optilis is not included in this. This is exclusively for the housing companies, not least because, of course, Optalis is not just owned by Wokingham, it's also owned by the Royal Borough. So any arrangements for Optilis would have to be agreed between the 2 councils. I think your impression, or the impression you've just conveyed of improvement, is one I would endorse. I think there's much better sense of shared commitment and direction. And the new regime is much more willing to work with the council for the council's purposes and with the council's strategic objectives in mind. I think that can be achieved through this mechanism. I think we're going to have to wait and see whether it works as well as we'd like it to work. But this is the recommendation of an independent report, which we've heard, this is a report by a reputable body that knows far more about how housing companies operate than probably any of us do. And this is what they're recommending. And I think it would be, we would be unwise to just reject that expert advice.
Caroline.
Thank you. I just wanted to carry on from the point made by Charles. Also, I wanted you to also confirm that you said all of them agree that this is a good idea, all the housing committees, organisations agree.
As far as I'm aware, all of the housing companies are in agreement with this, and Simon can confirm that.
That's good. I just wanted that confirmed. But also, carrying on from the meetings 3 times a year, or more frequently, I'm a bit concerned about only having a minimum of 2 to make it quorate. It's just if they've only got 3 meetings a year and you've only got 2 people in it, I know you talk about having more, but I think minimum 2, I would be happy with 3 or 4. It just, yeah. Thank you.
I understand your concern, Caroline. I mean, the proposal is for 4 executive members who would have full voting rights to be on there. So they are the only people ultimately who would be making the decisions. There'd be a non-executive member from the opposition who would be able to participate, but would not have voting rights. So if you fix the quorate at 4, you're saying everyone has to be there at every meeting for it to be able to go ahead. So 4, I think, would be too high. We can consider whether should any change from 2 to 3 might be appropriate, but I think this is regarded as an acceptable quorum by those who drafted this report. So I think we need to take advice before any commitment was made to change that. But I do understand your point.
Thank you.
Norman.
I have concerns about this also. I think it would be normal in the commercial world for a parent body to have representation on the boards of subsidiary bodies, perhaps 1, perhaps even 2, a sort of operational plus finance, I guess. So I do have a concern. I don't think really it's the right way to go. I think we will lose control if we go that way. Can I just ask a question, therefore? How much involvement does the council finance team now have in the monitoring and control of these companies on a week-by-week, month-by-month basis?
Simon's probably a better place to answer that.
Exactly that, Norman. Weekly and monthly, both strategic and operational meetings, which involve myself, the company's head of finance, the assistant management accountant. So we go through the full hierarchy of staff, from the exchequer section right the way through to payments, right the way through to the financial management team within the council. So absolutely joined at the hip these days over how the company's finances are run, because of what has transpired over the life of the company over the 10-year period, 11-year period, that matters to do with loans and investment, for example, have only just been, if you like, finalised from what was set up originally in terms of the way that we do business, where auditors have become involved, not in a fraudulent sense, but in terms of what best practice is and how the council deals with all matters as far as the housing companies are concerned. So very, very supportive of one another, very well understood through the weekly and monthly liaison.
So is that formal, and is that going to continue under this new arrangement?
Absolutely. I see. I mean, I hear the concerns, but I don't believe that this is a loss of control. I really do think that it'll be, you know, for us to determine what works best for the council. So what's in the report now, here in the comments, may not be what you know, is finally determined. And again, I can't impress enough on the council that the relationship has completely changed. Stephen's referred to it, but there was a perhaps, dare I say it, a view within the company that we were somehow independent of the council, or could be independent of the council. And I don't hold that view as the managing director, and would advise the board accordingly to think differently. And certainly in the hierarchy and network of meetings that we've got, there can be no dispute about the housing company's commitment, all three housing companies' commitment to determining what the and supporting what the council's housing need agenda is.
And is there then, it sounds therefore there's quite an extensive interaction with council officers again on a week by week, month by month basis?
Yeah, and as a very outgoing and communicative person myself, if you know, I have regular briefings with the shadow housing elected member. In fact, I'll be speaking to Laura tomorrow to update her on one or two things. So we meet monthly to keep her in the loop on what's happening.
Okay. Are the meetings between the companies and the council officers minuted?
There are notes taken of those meetings and actions, yes.
But no formal minutes on the record?
No formal minutes, because they're not formal committees, as it were. They are just strategic and operational meetings where we discuss matters outstanding, things we need to do, and their notes are taken and actions against individuals who need to deliver.
Okay, the reason I'm probing is just again the governance sort of and the line of control, and because no doubt anytime any of us have a meeting, you know, you discuss things and people take away from these meetings what they think is agreements quite often, when perhaps they're not formal agreements. I just that's really what I was probing around the governance outside of the shareholder committee meetings.
Well, I would be more than happy in support of this report, and possibly going forward as a recommendation from this evening to present to the executive when it goes exactly what hierarchy of meetings we have, from strategic right the way through to operational, be it finance, be it the development programme, be it on governance and structure, so that you are reassured that there is appropriate checks and balances, controls in place between the council and the company, and that the business is, where it matters, is discussed and tracked and actioned where necessary within appropriate timescales.
Sorry. Okay, I think that would probably be helpful actually, just so that people understand that, because it sounds like, again, going back to Caroline and Charles's point, you know, if there's only 2 or 3 meetings a year, that sounds a bit rather light. So in reality, it's not that infrequent. There's a lot more meetings going on, so it'd be as well to record that and make people aware of that from a governance point of view.
Marie-Louise.
Thank you. I'm a very new councillor, and I feel that I've arrived late at a party that where a lot has gone on before. And I'm really still not sure, having read the report and this, exactly what problem this is intended to solve. Yeah. Now, that might be because I wasn't there. Yeah. But the sort of, you know, is it that there were too many councillors? Is it that they were annoying? Which I can easily believe. But so, you know, and I realise that, you know, for various reasons it might not be made clear, but in this it is not clear what will be different coming out of this structure, i.e., you know, what the problem is that you're meant to solve. I do have a question about democratic accountability. Like, the council is elected, and this seems to be drawing the running of the companies quite openly away from changes that take place within, you know, as a result of the votes of residents. And the third point is about the ability of this structure to react to changes in the environment, because things might change, both on the council in terms of the composition of it, but also in the wider external environment in terms of changes in planning, changes in the ability of councils to build houses themselves, for example, and how, you know, this structure seems like we know that institutions, you know, the longer they last, their own continuation becomes their prime directive, becomes their prime purpose. And how, you know, how flexible would this structure be to be able to respond to the changes that, you know, some of us hope to see in the future? So, I mean, those, yeah.
Well, some of those are political questions, some are technical questions. I'll try and delegate to Simon the technical questions, and I'll try and deal with the more political ones. The council is very fortunate that we have a number of different options available to us in terms of affordable housing. Thankfully, due to the great good sense of our tenants, we still have a housing revenue account stock. It's not very large, but it's around 2,700 homes. Clearly, if there were opportunities to expand that, I think that would be a very good thing for the HRA. It would give it longer term, much greater sustainability, because at the moment, the stock, there are a few incremental additions here and there, but it's essentially staying static because obviously the stock is exposed to the right to buy. So you can lose some properties as well as you might be able to gain some. And in the properties you tend to lose are the properties that are in the best condition. The properties you retain are often the older properties needing more maintenance and repair. So you're probably getting a situation over a time where you're increasing the need to spend money on repairs and maintenance, but your income is not growing, or not growing proportionately, because the housing stock remains the same. So it only grows through rent increases. So in the long term, it would be better for the HRA if it were bigger. There's no doubt about that. And it may well be that in the future there are opportunities to grow it. We are expanding it in a relatively modest way already through the Gorse Ride regeneration scheme, which is adding new properties as well as simply renovating and replacing old ones. But I personally would welcome that very much. I would like to see the HRA bigger because I think it would be good for the HRA and its long-term viability. But we also have these wholly owned council companies. Those companies have never been controlled by the council as a whole. Appointment to the boards was in the gift of the leader of the council. Pauline said that sometimes non-executive members are appointed, but the practice is usually that executive members are on there. These arrangements, in theory, at least, will actually lead to greater visibility by the council than they get at the moment. So this is a step, from your perspective, I hope, in the right direction, not the wrong direction. But I think Simon might be able to talk a little bit more about some of the challenges that the Altair report saw itself as trying to address.
Yeah, I think we all like to deal with examples, and embedded within the Altair report, to answer your question about the changing environment, was a clear recommendation that although the governance and structure were matters that the council could consider, they were suggesting that, you know, with a general election in the next 12 months or so, that there could be some changes around housing policy, something like that, and therefore it would be prudent at this stage to continue as we were, or as we are. That doesn't mean to say that we wouldn't review the efficiencies of the way the companies are operating or anything like that, but the 3 companies which are in existence, we wouldn't be proposing to do what had been thought about previously, where we've had pieces of work done about, for example, the acquisition of Berrybrook by Loddon Homes, or the winding up of Wokingham Housing Limited, because the council provides the development strategy service back to the housing companies now as a direct service under a service level agreement. So there have been some changes over the recent past, but we're not planning on doing anything imminently that would see us fetter our discretion around a changing environment.
Any comeback?
Sorry, I still don't understand what problem this is meant to address.
Maybe I could come in and give you my view of what the problem is. Certainly, having met and talked with the directors who are not elected members, they were very, very strongly of the view that elected members on the boards did not add any value. In fact, they often detracted from the quality of the performance of the board. They were often political appointees. They weren't appointed because they had expertise in an area. And there was a concern that on occasions, they could be preponderant on the board, and it meant that the experts were not really able to get their opinion properly reflected. So I think there were real concerns about how those boards were functioning. Certainly in later years, I think this may be a completely different picture from what had been the original setup, which I understand was quite different. But I think it's fair to say something has changed within the way these companies operated. I mean, it comes back to a point that was made by Norman and others, really, about the quality of control. I mean, a lot of the quality of control, irrespective of the mechanisms, the governance mechanisms, rests with the quality of the individuals who are involved. There's no question about that. And it is a bit of a hit and miss, I'm afraid, when you have councillor appointments. That's the problem. A real hit and miss. You can get some extremely good and capable councillors, and you can get some who are perhaps less committed and less capable. You don't really know. And that was the problem, I think, for a lot of these directors. They just didn't know whether they were going to get the best or the less good.
Norman.
Yeah, I mean, I think you say mostly executive members. Going back quite a number of years, there were mostly not executive members that were on the boards of these companies. Our group at the time selected people that had experience on boards, and it was that was the determining factor rather than whether they were an executive member or not. So it may have changed in recent years, but certainly going back 10 years, that was the case.
I'm quite prepared to accept that was the case at its origins, but certainly it had become, and this is not under the current administration, it's the situation we inherited, it had become an exclusive preserve of executive members.
Any other questions? No. I've got a couple. First one talks about the opposition member. Can they be subbed? It doesn't say any clarity. It doesn't exactly say that in the articles.
Well, in some senses, that wouldn't be any problem at all, because this will be a public meeting at which any councillor could attend. It's just that this opposition member would be entitled to participate in the discussions. I personally don't see any problem with a substitute if a substitute's required. I can't see any difficulty with that. The whole purpose of this is to ensure that there is an opposition presence and a participant in the debate. So a sub would be a perfectly sensible recommendation for you to make, perhaps.
Okay, I've got that. So let me just continue with mine. I think one of the issues I have is an example of a decision-making process is sort of see how that would fit through and how it would deal with conflict resolution between the stakeholders and the board. I'd like to see what process steps are formally documented there, and that would be, I think, would be nice to see as a recommendation. Right, with that, I'll go over to Pauline. Sorry.
Simon, do you answer that?
Yeah, Simon.
I believe that that would all be contained, Chair, within the Memorandum of Agreement, and clear dispute resolutions would be included in that as standard.
Thank you. Pauline.
I'm still really uncomfortable with it, but I'd like to understand what the legal responsibilities of the shareholder board are, bearing in mind they're not directors of the company. I mean, the directors of a company are required to act in good faith, they're required to disclose their interests, and they've got a duty to exercise powers in the interests of the company. If the shareholder board are not directors, they don't have those same legal responsibilities. When they conflict with each other, how are you going to square that circle? And also, just to get into a little bit more detail, if you've got an opposition member which is outnumbered on the shareholder board, I cannot see why they shouldn't be able to vote. I couldn't see any reason why they wouldn't be able to vote, and I would expect that an opposition member who was asked to be on a shareholder board but couldn't vote probably wouldn't be willing to be on it. So I'd like to understand their legal responsibilities, and I'd like to understand how those legal responsibilities match with the legal responsibilities of the actual board directors. And I think finally, I'm sure in a lot of company directors or a lot of company operational directors might think that they'd be happy to get rid of the non-executive board occasionally, but just because they say that's a good idea doesn't mean it is.
Well, those are really interesting and important points. I think all councillors have an obligation, legal obligation, to declare an interest where an interest is held that might prejudice the way in which they cast their vote or make any decision. So in that sense, the legal position is the same. Well, let me just finish my point. Yeah, I said in that sense. There are other legal requirements, but on the question about acting in the best interests of the company, surely this gets in a way to the heart of it. This shareholder committee is there to act in the best interests of the council and its residents. They are there to oversee and make sure that the company is operating in the proper way. The board directors are there to ensure that they operate in the best interests of the company. We want the company's interests and the council's interests to be completely aligned, and this is a mechanism for doing it.
I think that's my point, where you have a set of executive or non-executive directors of a company who are solely interested in the performance of that company, and a shareholder board who are interested, as they should be, in the interests and the responsibility to the council. How are you going to bridge that gap when they don't agree? Because at the moment you've got a mixture on the board and you can deal with that. In future they'll be separated. How do you deal with that?
I think we've just said that there's going to be a memorandum of understanding which will set out conflict resolution measures, but ultimately the shareholder committee is the boss. The council is the sole shareholder. It owns all of the shares in the company. Ultimately, it's the boss, and the company has to align itself with what the shareholder committee wants.
Okay, I feel going a bit round in circles there. So, okay, sorry, I didn't see that. So we've got Simon and Andrew. So I don't know who. Andrew was first.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to add to the debate. So Marie-Louise asked the question about, well, what's the problem that's trying to be solved here? So again, going back to the Altair report, it did talk about, I'm not saying actual conflict of interest, but potential conflict of interest, where, as Pauline has said, that the obligation for a non-exec director is to the company and not to the council. This removes any potential conflict of interest in that the shareholder committee would act solely in the interests of the council as shareholder. And the question as well, Pauline, that you asked about the opposition member. So it isn't a shareholder board, it's a shareholder committee, it's a subcommittee of the executive, and that's the reason that there would be no voting rights for the opposition member on that committee.
Yep.
Andrew, you could make it a subcommittee of the council, in which case you could easily have voting rights on all members of the committee. Most of the committees that we have are subcommittees of the council, not of the executive. So, for instance, there's plenty of committees that have votes for all the members, and they're all subcommittees of the full council. It seems to work perfectly well, even with a ruling group. I mean, planning is a subcommittee of the full council. I can think of others, and it's perfectly normal for every member of a committee to have a vote.
All I'd say through you, Chair, is that we've looked quite extensively across other authorities in terms of how they organise and execute a shareholder committee. And I've not seen any examples from any other council that hasn't exercised the shareholder committee through its cabinet or through its executive.
Okay. Simon.
Chair, I wasn't going to add any. I don't think I can add anything more that hasn't already been said. Thank you.
Okay. Pauline, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to point out to Andrew that when we had the under us, when we had the boards of the companies, we actually for quite a long time had opposition members as full voting members on them. So it's not unusual. You may not.
I think you had one opposition member for a while who was summarily removed, I seem to recall.
No.
We had more than one, I think, on different occasions.
I think that's I fundamentally don't like this model, so I'm not trying to argue our way into a committee. I'm just saying that there is precedent that says if you're a member of a committee, you should have a vote, and if you want somebody to be a member of a committee, you should give them the opportunity to vote. In democratic terms, they may be a minority, they may be completely outnumbered, that's absolutely fine, and the prerogative of the ruling group, but to make somebody a second-class member of a committee that you're setting up doesn't seem right to me.
Well, I think Andrew has given an explanation which I don't really need to repeat, but this is a committee of the executive, it's not a committee of the council.
My point is it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to reach agreement there. All right. Any other questions from anybody? No? Bear with me for a second. Yeah, I think one of my questions was really why it had to be executive members, but I think we've covered that question. I must admit, from my point of view, I'm a little uncomfortable with being purely executive members, because part of this does say about members who have experience. If you're reducing the pool of people with experience, then that could be an interesting issue.
Obviously, there may be an officer view that would be helpful here. But if you look at the proposed membership, it's the leader, the deputy leader, executive member for business and economic development, executive member for finance. So these are all people who one would expect to be able to exercise the role of a shareholder committee member effectively. They're all people one would hope are experienced in running organisations and know what they're doing.
Yeah, go.
But I think in the same breath, you've said they're not suitable to be executive directors of a company, so which way is it?
I've said that they're occupying places on boards that may be better filled by people who are more expert, and that the strategic overview of how the companies operate, the direction they're given, the monitoring is best done through a shareholder committee. This is a committee of the executive, and it will act in the best interests of the council, as it's legally obliged to do. The companies act in the best interest of the company. It doesn't matter whether you have elected members on them. Those elected members are effectively, in their capacity as elected directors, member directors, acting in the best interests of the company. They may informally think that they're acting in the best interests of the council, but there is a conflict of interest there. This removes that conflict of interest.
Yeah, I think I get that now. Thank you. Any other comments from anybody else? Sorry,
Yeah, yes, I have a hand up.
Oh, Alison, go
I just wanted to ask how the member of the opposition, it says a member of the opposition would be invited. Obviously, you know, we have two opposition parties at the moment, and we know sometimes have independents. Could there be more clarity about that, that it would be an invitation, you know, it would be somebody from the main opposition group by the choice of the leader, or just how they would be selected?
I don't see any reason why there couldn't be more clarity or more detail on that, but Andrew may want to comment on that.
Yes, Alison, we can take that point away. Certainly, yes, I agree. It would benefit along the lines as Stephen and yourself have just said. So we can add that to the report.
Thank you.
Charles.
It's a quick one. Councillors are currently paid allowances for sitting as non-executive directors of the housing companies. No? Oh, I'm wrong. Okay.
They most emphatically are not.
Okay. No, that's fine.
They were originally, but that was removed some while ago.
And I'm assuming there'd be no allowances to people on the shareholder committee.
No, there would not be.
Okay, so we've got to come to some recommendations. So we've got the paper with its 3 points for recommendations. We do have some explicit recommendations, is that the opposition member can be substituted, just to get that text in. Composition of who is the opposition member, greatest opposition party, whatever. I guess that would be fair enough to do. I think the committee is, again, disagree with me, just to say, is concerned about the procedures dealing with conflict and would like to see that actually explicitly documented in the articles, maybe with an example. Any other comments there?
Yes, there were comments as well about the amount of meetings every year and the amount of people who would be required to be quorate. And there was some discussion about them, but just a firm conclusion on what's recommended would be helpful.
Pauline?
And I think there was just the assurance that the minutes from this committee would be in the public domain and it would be properly minuted. And I'd like to add a recommendation that all members of the committee have a vote on the same way as we do with planning.
Okay, so first one, let's talk about the quorum. I think Charles makes the point of 2 people. That could be interesting, so if you just explain that.
We could certainly look at whether it would be more appropriate to make that 3.
Okay, and then to Pauline's point about voting, we've already discussed that and said no.
We've discussed that. We have discussed that quite extensively. If this is to remain a committee of the executive, which is how this report presents it, then clearly there can't be voting rights for an opposition member. It's entirely in your gift to make any recommendations you want. There was another point that I think was raised that might have got lost somewhere along the line. Charles, did you say something other than...
I was talking about the number of meetings every year.
Yeah. I hoped we'd given some reassurance on that this is merely scratching the surface of what will actually happen.
Yeah, if I may make a suggestion, Chair, Stephen is right. There was discussion about that, and Simon, if I remember correctly, outlined that there are currently meetings every 2 months. And I'm not suggesting that work and meetings just for the sake of meetings, But I think, I mean, I can't speak for other members, but I'd feel reassured if there was an obligation to meet more frequently if this is going to go through. Yeah. I mean, you may not want to answer that now, but to take away and actually have a look and give some thought to. I just know from my own experience of being involved in companies, you sit in a board meeting once every 4 months, you get information from the 4 months before, you then make a decision, basically, which gets implemented. You've got a 6-month lag, which for me is too long if you want to have tight control on where the ship is going.
Yeah, I think that tight control may be exercised not just through these regular meetings, but through what Simon also referred to as regular conversations outside meetings. And also, it's perfectly possible to call additional meetings as and when required. That's implied in the report. And I think it may well be that that will be required. I would imagine it will be.
Simon.
Yes, without giving myself some work, I did offer to supplement the report by picking up on Norman's point and describing what hierarchy of meetings we have from both an operational and strategic perspective to give assurance to members that things are done properly and professionally and where appropriate. There are records kept of the decisions that we've taken in that respect. And the other thing that we shouldn't lose sight of, although again it's potential additional work, but again we're here to be open and transparent. At the last meeting, I did say that even though the shareholder committee would be a subcommittee of the executive, there is no reason why the housing companies should not, on a 6-monthly basis or however frequently members determined within their work programme for scrutiny, attend scrutiny meetings to discuss the business of the housing companies. So I can't say that that is, you know, a mealy offer. It's certainly there for members to take up the opportunity. We have no problem with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think okay, Pauline, go for it.
Sorry, just to come back on Charles's point about frequency, I think one of the other benefits of having them more frequently is actually you get to understand what's going on a bit better. If you have a meeting every 3 or 4 months, by the time you get to the next meeting, if you're as old as I am, you've forgotten what happened in the previous one. So I think having it more frequently would be good. I'd also like to see these meetings be more forward-looking than just marking homework. And I think that's another reason why it needs to be more frequent. I'm still very concerned about this. I mean, I would still like to push the voting element. I've not come across a committee before. We have 2 tiers of membership. I think it should be a subcommittee of the full council, and I think we should recommend that as well.
On your point about frequency, yes, I think we've addressed that now quite fully. I am quite sure that we'll end up with more meetings than this suggests.
Okay, so let's take it forward with the recommendations. So, which is about the meetings.
But it should be a subcommittee of full council, and that all members should be able to vote. Because having a committee that only some members can vote is really weird, in my view.
That's a good point, but I'm not too sure whether to take that on as a recommendation. We note it as a note. You're proposing it? Okay, let's go for a vote for it then. So, who's seconding it? Norman? Okay, voting for? Voting against? Okay, that's dismissed. Thank you. Okay, so we'll go forward with what we have, which is, let's say, the point making that sub for the opposition member. Includes documentation about the conflict resolution, so we like to see that as an example. Includes the hierarchical nature of the meeting schedule. Review the meeting schedule for the stakeholders to make sure that you kept up to date and not just a touch base, but kept up to date, so please review that. Review the quorum members, increasing it from 2 to 3. And I believe that's it. Anybody else? No? Okay.
You cover your idea of substitute opposition members?
Yes, that's the first one. Yeah, that's the very first one.
Yeah.
Okay, so happy with those recommendations? Should we take it to a vote? So voting for? Voting against? Okay, thank you. Thank you. That item's closed. Moving on to the next one, which that is Highways Transport Continuous Improvements. Chris Easton. Sorry, Chris. Go ahead.
Indeed. No, hi, good evening. Evening, Chair, members. Thank you for inviting us back. Oh, Simon, your camera's still on. You're happy? I'm happy for you to stay and join us.
Well, having been involved with the service, I wanted to say what progress had been made, Chris. I hope you don't mind, but if you'd rather not, I'll push off.
Nice to see you.
And you.
I'll use that half of the screen now when you go for my presentation. So yeah, thank you for inviting us back. It's been a few months since we were here, and obviously we weren't talking to you about customer service at the time, but obviously we did touch on it. So yeah, let me just quickly share my screen. There we go. Excellent. Thank you. So yeah, thanks for inviting us along. Thanks, Chair, members. So we were asked to come back. The item that was added for tonight's agenda was improvements to the communications and resident satisfaction within the Highways and Transport Service. So as you're aware, obviously this presentation was provided. Hopefully you've got sight of it. I can see a few of you have got it on your desk there, which is great. So yeah, as you're probably aware, we're responsible for all adopted roads and footpaths across the entire network. Obviously, we have, as well as all the asset management, transport planning, street works, which is a key topic for many residents and members. Traffic management, obviously, for all of the setup requirements for WL lines, parking, so on and so forth. Highways planning, or through the planning, the statutory obligations that we have to provide through planning, and the planning committee, and all the active travel and corporate transport, which obviously recently is quite heavily focused on in terms of the home to school transport. So we have a contractor who's Volker Highways, which I'm sure many of you will know, and they've been with us now for 5 years, and they're responsible for maintaining the majority of our highway network alongside our officers in-house. So the safety of our residents is obviously our main priority, and that would always be the case. We schedule safety inspections on a regular occurrence, and this is in line with the Council's WIP, the Wokingham Highways Inspection Policy, which is available on the Council's website. However, we do obviously request and like residents to obviously identify and focus and report things to us on a regular occurrence, because our inspections are obviously of set timelines in line with that WIP, but obviously we do need to understand if there are any issues and constraints out there. And so that's part of the features that we've been working on to improve. So just the whole list down the right-hand side is just a number of things and the features that we've got, which is quite sizable. Some of them actually, this is the snapshot. This changes on a regular occurrence. So some of that has expanded since this was previously done. So just picking up on some of the bits that I touched on the last time we met, the service has gone through, is obviously changing as best we can. It is a universal service, as we've mentioned, touches on and works with all the residents. There's always been a huge demand on the Highways and Transport Department. In 2023, so obviously back in last year, it was agreed that the volumes of calls and emails that were coming in was just becoming unsustainable, and it was having an effect on the quality of the responses and the times at which we were responding to residents through the reporting system and through obviously email correspondence. So we decided to obviously look at the structure of the service and obviously pull some of those focuses together to look at the customer excellence program, and obviously to build on obviously reducing any complaints and obviously the processes that we have for our SLAs for response times to inquiries. So in September last year, we started the program, and we have since hired a project manager to help us with all of the change program. And we've also brought in-house a business and customer excellence manager who actually is on the call tonight, and they'll be at the end to assist if you have any questions, which may help with what review. And they both joined the organisation, obviously, as I say, in September, and then closely followed to that, we had a contract manager that has now come into the organisation. So we have always done these kind of functions, but now we've got them dedicated to the Highways and Transport Service. The contract manager we have had in-house previously, but obviously not dedicated solely to the contracts that we have. And these are sizable multi-million-pound contracts, and therefore the focus on contract management is essential. Further to the appointment of these, we've had a number of roles that have been vacant in the service for a few years, and we've struggled to kind of fill them, or they've been backfilled on a temporary basis. I'm pleased to say, as of the 2nd of February, I think it was, we ended up with full complements. We now have a head of network management and transport planning. We have a head of delivery and engineering, and we have a head of operational highways and major projects, and that's the service that works fundamentally the most with our operatives of our highways. So just picking up on the continuous improvement program, here's just a kind of a quick snapshot of a number of the pieces that we're currently working through, and it's by no means probably the complete list. It's everything that we've currently got listed down that we're working on. And so just picking up on a few, so the 3Cs training we've got there, that picks up on the kind of the care, the clarity and the confidence in our staff responding and how they respond. So it's the customer excellence program that the council is operating, and every member of the Highways and Transport Service has been sent on that training program. So obviously our key focus in line with the council's visions and values is to keep the borough moving and obviously a customer focus. So obviously that's the important one, and a number of the staff responses have improved significantly through that. To help us obviously understand and how we're improving as well, KPI reviews. We reviewed our KPIs in each of the teams, then obviously across the service, then obviously they'll fit into the director wide, and then obviously those ones will get picked out of there that feed into the corporate. And that's something that each team can then keep an eye on, have like a dashboard that they can monitor and see how their service and their team is running and operating. We're listening, so call listening and scoring. So when we have obviously all these calls that come into the service or to our Volker Highways operatives, we do listen to them on a regular occurrence, so we can obviously improve and feedback on how the quality of that call is, and try to get to the point of first time fix for all of our residents. So if something comes in and it's not right, we can then obviously teach those operatives the best way, show them the website, teach them how to kind of be able to fulfill the need of the resident or the caller when they come in. We've also got the Google Analytics and the website, how we're going to update that, all the bits and pieces we're looking at and pulling that data out. So it's quite fundamental that we get our website right to help the residents self-serve. And linked to that, we're also looking at policies, plans and our strategies. So we're pulling all those together at the moment to make sure that we have a full complement and a full package. So therefore that will help us because we're finding through a number of the complaints, and this is dealing with that data, is that the complaints come back, and whilst it's not the complaint is they're not happy with the response that we're given. Now the response given is technically right, but what it is it's just saying, no, you can't have this, probably a bit more detail than that. But obviously what we're trying to do is improve, have the plans, have the policies and our strategies on our website, so when we respond, we can respond fully, and we can actually direct them to the website with the correct links to those policies so they can fully understand the reason why it was given a no or a yes or whatever it may be. But hopefully with all that information on the website, it will help the resident and customer to kind of understand what needs to be done as they go through that whole process. There's one on there, potholes, obviously a key topic for everybody. We have a new pothole reporting system, which is kind of fundamentally the same reporting system, but obviously we're creating a new web page that will help people understand what that information might look like. So it will have kind of, this could be a delamination of a carriageway, and therefore it's not a safety defect or classed as a pothole. And therefore it will kind of give a recommendation. If your pothole looks like this, this or this, then these are the categories of which you can either pick up the phone, because we class that as an emergency and you should call it in instantly, or report it in and we'll come back to you, or it's not a safety defect, but please feel free to still report it and we'll pick it up and obviously put it into our working program. And I think linked to that is Tracker Fault. A number of people may or may not already use the the report it system. We hope you do, and that's one of the features we want to encourage people to still continue doing. And if you do, then obviously that's great. But being able to track a fault is quite essential, and that's something that hasn't worked properly up until now. So with the team in place, we're able to start to put a lot of these features that we want in place to help improve. So there's many things there. I won't go through them all, but obviously traffic travel, social news, all this stuff we want to try and enhance and improve. Just picking up So Councillor Alistair Neil, when we were last met, he actually fed back in that session. So this is just picking up on a couple of examples of actions. He picked up saying that, it just says report a pothole on the road, but it didn't say footway. So he asked if that can be changed. And this is what we want to hear. If people have changes that they will help benefit them or benefit us, then we're happy to do that. So here's an example, obviously, of him raising that with us. We picked it up, we addressed it, and obviously he's very thankful. Other comments around, the parking service and kind of changes were made. People can't find their permits and stuff like that on the system. So again, we worked through the processes. We've updated the web page. We've made the information clearer, and obviously lessons learned. So there were some pieces that perhaps we should have got out on the website before some of the changes went through. And so we're making sure that programs are in place to that those steps, if they were stuck in the process, they were ensured they get done before it's needed. And again, here, just examples, so many people, and I've heard from you, Pauline, and other members, that when some residents were getting a response saying, thanks for the inquiry, no actions needed, full stop, and that isn't sufficient. That's not what we need. That's not what the residents want. And so obviously we've built a number of standard responses which help and provide a lot of information. So if it is a kind of a no, thanks for informing us, it provides a lot more information. So some of these, a lot of roadworks, as people perhaps are aware, and I hope you are aware, our network is undertaken by 80% of the roadworks on our network is undertaken by utility companies, and a lot of people have the understanding, or they believe, that they are council works. They're not council works. We obviously have a process in managing them, but obviously we get a lot of queries and complaints in. So obviously some of these standard responses will give them a fuller answer, and obviously provide details and contact numbers for some of these, or for all of the utility companies that we have listed. So just moving on to customer relationship management system that we have. This helps us to track, log, and report back. So the aim is for the customer to be able to self-serve. Where it isn't possible, the aim is to obviously the highway inquiries should come directly via the customer relationship management system. And as I say, it gives us the ability to track, monitor, log, and so on and so forth. And using that system allows us to track the responses and all the times given, and obviously we're looking at the SLAs as mentioned, and it also helps us to prevent duplications. So we do get on times, there's emails that might come in from a resident that might go to a couple of members, those couple of members send it to a few more members, and we end up sometimes receiving the same query 10 times via, from the same root source. And obviously what that does is it takes away capacity from the service, and sometimes it's hard to kind of know who's responded, who hasn't responded. So the CRM system allows us to, so we're trying to make sure, even if those do come in like that, and I'm not saying, we'd ideally like that to stop happening, but obviously if it does, we're improving the process internally to capture all of them, to get them into the system so they can get logs. We can get more data about the number of queries coming in. We can improve the numbers and obviously feed them back. So here's just a quick snapshot of obviously the inquiries over the year. Yes, it has obviously spiked a little bit into the January, but when we've looked at the data there, it's still a fall on the year. There's some more data on that shortly, but unfortunately we do have spikes like this, and obviously it has been a very wet winter. We have obviously a very high calls for potholes, as has the rest of the country, and that was predominantly the focus on those. This is in relation to the complaints, and this picks up on the piece I was just talking about just now in relation to the number of queries that come in. And they may come in top down as well. And we want to kind of make sure that we funnel them all into the correct process to give us the correct stats, and then we can follow those right the way through, and obviously give the customer the outcome that they require. This is just taking a quick snapshot of the calls taken into the system. So calls into the council are directed, and we want to direct them to Barker Highways. The service is here. However, a high number of calls are selecting the option of going through to our switchboard, which obviously isn't what we want that to happen. We're trying to get Volkers to pick up and take the majority of all the calls as possible. That is their requirement. And so by improving that and giving the confidence, our customers should hopefully start to do that and stop going through to the council's highways, the council's customer service team, rather than the Volkers customer service team, which have all the information to hand and can give the customer the right answer. So obviously we're working to improve that system, as I said, to encourage and give the resident and the customer the confidence to continue to do that. But I think, in essence, 25.3% decrease in the highways and transport calls taken by WBC year on year, year over year for the last is quite an achievement, considering the number of calls, particularly around car parking and potholes, which have been 2 large spikes over the last year. So for us, our next steps, our continued programme is to increase our reach. So obviously we touched on earlier the traffic and travel branding communications, both social media and newsletter. We already have a very large reach, probably one of the largest across the council's feeds, and we want to grow that as much as possible to get as much information to people as we can. Improve all the websites to make sure the information is all correct, and therefore again using that GovMetrics information, if people are aware of it, the kind of the red, amber, green smiley faces. We do even pick up all of those. So if somebody puts a negative red comment, we will look at the comment, we'll understand the comment, and we'll make that change to the website. So then that removes it for everybody moving forward. And we'll continue to do those until obviously the website is the best it can be. Answer your questions first time. Again, continue to support our Volker Highways and their call centre through call listening, monitoring their KPIs, feeding back through the corporate elements of the contract management with the right team. Again, more efficient service by obviously including the new pothole system, meaning that the staff are kind of focusing on the work at hand, and obviously the CRM system is essential to us, and the new customer management system. So that again, as we've mentioned, is our key role to kind of be able to study all the data, give everybody their answers, so you get everything through the system as best we possibly can. So very quick run through, hope that helps. It was a snapshot of the customer improvements, and happy to catch up and answer any questions, and Joe's here also if you have anything you want to ask.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Pass that to Pauline.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you very much for your team for all the help over the last year. They do try very hard. So, yeah, thank you very much. A couple of questions.
Yeah.
The restructuring of the department phase 1, it'd be really useful to have names against those boxes, and also responsibilities, because more or less every box says something to do with planning or project management. It's not very clear who you'd go to in which case, and who looks after street lights, for example, or drains or anything like that. So if you could tell us a bit more about what each, not now, but what each box does and who it is, that would be really useful.
Yeah.
And
no, absolutely. I just to quickly jump in on that, that's definitely something we did talk about presenting, but again, it's the kind of, because of the CRM system, we didn't necessarily want people going directly to them, but when it comes into the CRM system, we have all of that documented, who does what, where they all sit. And Carisse, the lady who currently works in our area, that team, she is directing them all brilliantly to the right people to ensure that they get back really quickly.
So my observation for that is, if you don't want us to go directly to people or roles or whatever, then don't tell us anything about the roles. Don't give us a little taster that says these are the roles when you don't know what they're going to do and you don't know who they are.
Okay, ignore that slide then.
Okay. The second one is the Highways General Inquiry thing, which comes up and says you won't get response for 20 days. My experience of that is actually you get response very quickly, actually. You may be underselling yourself, but it's really difficult to find unless you've sent an email to Highways Maintenance or Highways Asset Management or whatever, and it's come back and said, we don't read these emails, so please use this form. If you do a search on the website for Highways General Inquiry, it comes up with 5,054 results, none of which seem to be Highways General Inquiry, at least the top few pages aren't. So if we could make that easier for people like us to use, because generally the things that we ask about have got nothing to do with any of your categories. They're usually a bit more offbeat and a bit more complicated, which is why residents come to us in the first place. So making that easier for councillors would be really helpful. Thanks.
Indeed. I can see this is something Joe's quite passionate about and working on. I can see her wanting to jump in, so I'll...
That's fine. No, it is something we're working on. It has been we were struggling because when I came on board on the role, the general inquiry form seemed to be put on all the report it pages. And that was kind of causing issues because people were then reporting things through the system. Also, the drop downs, I think, were quite clunky and they weren't maybe as customer friendly as we wanted them to be. So I've kind of put my customer hat on and been working with the IT team to come up with the new system that's going to be going live on Netcall. So the categories and the subcategories have been fixed. Yes, and then once they've done that, the idea being we put it at the bottom of the roadworks page because at the moment, as an example, to kind of say, you know, can't find what you're looking for. If not, click on here's the Highways Inquiry page. But the idea being that the Highways Inquiry page is the last kind of step if you can't find what you're looking for. So my main focus is to try and figure out what everyone by listening to the calls and all those kind of things, have the information on the website. But yes, we most definitely do want to make it more prominent on all our pages. We are, I'm doing a lot of work with the IT team or the web team to kind of update all the highways pages, make it easier to find things, make it easier to find the general inquiry form. At the moment, they're working on the pothole page, which is hopefully going live soon. I'm hoping to get sign off this week. Once they've cleared that, we can then move forward.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, at the moment, the only way to find Highways General Inquiry page, unless you happen to have it embedded in your mind, is to actually email one of the email boxes you don't want us to email, and then use the link it comes back with.
Okay, thanks, Paul. That's good to know.
Okay, Charles.
Thank you. 2 points from me. First of all, the actual report says a lot of good things, basically, and what you talked about as well, all the right things about improving the service to the customer. But there were questions coming to my mind while I was hearing this. When you talked about analytics, I was thinking, well, I'd like to know how much and what's the target to improve it by. And you talked about basically reach of social media, again, and saying it's the best performing of the council pages. And that's good, but it gives me no idea really in the grand scale of things. Are the council pages talking to 1 to 10 people a week or 100 to 200,000? I don't know. So, I know you'll have the answers to all of this, but some of that basically information in this kind of report would be really helpful because it would give us an idea how successful it's being. Otherwise, I note with interest the comments about improving the website and the functionality for people to find how to do things. And it may be you're already planning this, but I was wondering if there's something that could be done on social media as well, for residents, because I, like other members, most of the comments you get, I had one on Saturday, the pavement on my road's fallen apart, basically, how do I go about getting it fixed? To which I told her, because I met her on the doorstep, you just go onto the website and you can find it. To which I got an email later in the day. So I've looked, Charles, I can't find it. Where do I get it from? Now, you can't guide the stupid, basically, but if you're continually pushing out information forwards in different channels, it can only make life better.
Yep. So the report it system, that's one of the first things I've done on the website. So if you go through to the highway section of like roads and road maintenance, there's now a huge banner at the top, report a problem, with a picture of a pothole. And we've used the Google Analytics to find out what the most popular highway pages are, and we've put them as links on. There's the 3 links at the top of the page. One is kind of roadworks. I think one at the moment is like, as I said, reporting a problem, and then I can't remember what the other one is, but we're using that, and we're constantly updating those pages. The roadworks pages, because we've had feedback about major projects, so all major roadworks are now kind of detailed in there as well, so that if someone is searching for a particular road and it's quite a big project, it comes up and it's easier to find. In regards to the stats, the social media, I think that we've got about 6,500 followers on Facebook. I think at last count, the Traffic and Travel newsletter that goes out weekly, I think was at between 15 and 16,000. So we are hitting a lot of people. And as you say, in the Traffic and Travel, I used to write it when I was part of the comms team, and now I kind of work with the CEM team to get stuff out. But we do put a lot of information out there about how to report it. We're also promoting the tracker fault. And we also take the information that we have and have sections like that's called Did You Know? So like Chris was saying, about 80% of the roadworks are actually utility companies, and we kind of explain to people how that works and then link that through back to the website. So we're constantly listening to what people are asking us and trying to get that information out there.
Thank you, and the improvements you're making are welcome. If you want to come back to me on this question outside this meeting, if you don't know, that's fine. But when you mentioned you're aware of what the most popular pages on the website are you able to say how many hits a month you're getting on this potholes page, for example, that you mentioned?
So the pothole page is not live yet. It's something that we're working on. So in terms of the new page that's going live, it's not live yet. It's kind of the final kind of tweaks, making sure everything works. But if you're asking how many people are using the report it page as it stands now, I can certainly get that from the web team. That's not a problem.
Thank you. And the other question I had has gone bang out of my mind, so we'll just leave that.
Anybody else? Caroline?
Just a quick question. You mentioned a minute ago that Councillor Neil did some feedback on one of the pages. So does he do, so we've got a problem with one of these, so do we do it online tomorrow morning, or shall I tell you tonight? I'm on the report a problem on road and streets, and there's a particular issue, and I was thinking we'll do it tomorrow morning, and that's the, because I want to be able to do it the same way as a resident would do it.
Yeah, so are you trying to report a problem? You're saying there's a problem with how we report it?
It's this, yes, it's a particular problem. Hold on a sec. It's street lighting. Usually when you report a street light, you have to do it individually, but we had a long row, and it took a long time to report the 10 street lights. So we'd like a bit in there that says, could we report a road street lights out?
Okay.
Yeah, we can look at that. Yeah, if you've got, have you got something you want to, if you just send us over, or we'll take a note now as well, and we'll catch up and have a look at that. Yeah, but that's the type of thing we'd like to hear and understand what people will help for both you and residents. Yeah.
Thank you.
Charles?
Sorry, I've remembered my other question now. It was basically, you mentioned there were 16,000 hits on the Facebook page, which is good. Do you have a target or a plan to try and increase that? And if so, what is?
Yeah, I'll let you go.
Oh, go on. No, I was just going to say, sorry. So I was just referring to the number of followers. So we've got 6,500 followers on our Facebook page. What I'm hoping to do moving forward, and it's something that I need to kind of talk to the team about more, is looking at the moment we're just using traffic and travel. It's something that I actually launched as part of the CEM team probably 6 years ago. Where we are giving people updates on the main roadworks. I want to move it forward now that I'm kind of in this role, to share more information about highways, more things about the major projects that are going on, and then more of the, instead of it just being this road is closed, it's actually giving a bit more of an explanation of what we're doing, what we're trying to achieve, or what we have achieved once those roadworks are done. So there's kind of lots of different things that we want to use that channel for.
I was just going to say I'm fully supportive of that. I think that's the way to talk to people, and half the issue I've always had with highways in terms of resident perceptions has been communication, and anything to step forward to actually improve that is welcome.
Yeah, I'd agree, Charles. I mean, obviously we've had this discussion a number of times with a number of residents and a number of members that kind of, when we put out these newsletters or the letter drops, we GPS, all our letter drops are GPS, so we know that they've been delivered to all the houses. But it's probably, I don't know, a very high percentage of people that say they've never received them, although we know they're definitely at the door. So it's trying to find another mechanism that we can encourage people to read these newsletters that come through the door, or these leaflets about works that are approaching. But yeah, the traffic and travel, as I say, it reaches a large amount of people, but not enough compared to how many people are in the borough. And we want to get that, we want to spread that more. So, any newsletter, we're trying to encourage, obviously, traffic and travel, because we can just get that weekly update out to people with what's happening, what is coming, as well as all those updates around, streetworks and onenetwork.org and stuff, which helps people understand before they leave the house in the morning, if they want to look at Google Maps, but they can also look at One Network to see if there's any roadworks in the area. And sometimes emergency ones pop up overnight, which are hard, and I know that's a big issue for people. But those types of things are really, really beneficial if people can get on board with looking at all that data, and it will really help them as well manage their own journeys.
Okay, Caroline.
It's just another thought. One of the problems we have, as you say, 80% of the works is utilities, and we do get reports from residents of the problems that they've created. Do you have a page, or could we have a block on here so you can collate all the problems we have? Because some of the utilities are better at clearing up after themselves or managing it at the time. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, we can take that away.
Okay, I've got one issue, or rather, I'll say thank you for the the change in replies to customers. That's a good one. Though I did have one resident complain that their report of a missing bus timetable was done as a safety inspection, so they were a little bit puzzled about that. But anyway, on the reporting a problem with roads and streets, you've got report a problem with litter bins. Does that include the one under the countryside services?
I would need to check, but luckily we've got Steve Brown I can see in the audience who might be able to. That doesn't fall under the highway section, but it is reported on the same page. But we can pick it up and take it away. Sorry, Steve, didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I think we'll just, I mean, Steve and I just had a quick chat and we think it probably does cover both, but we'll double check and come back to you. I'm sure it does. I'd like to think it definitely would do as well, but we'll double check and come back on that point, Chair.
Yeah.
Yes, Steve.
And just to follow up on what George has said, one of the remits that we're working through with the Task and Finish group is exactly that, about jurisdiction and efficiency and accountability. So that is one of the items that we picked up in the Task and Finish that had its inaugural meeting, I think, last week.
Good, thank you. The other question I have is on your continuous improvement programme. You've got NSL to manage PCN calls. That's kind of meaningless to me.
Sorry, yeah, I only picked a few out. I could have picked that one out. So NSL is they are our company that manage all the parking, the PCN. So they're the officers that go around parking enforcement. And so at the moment, obviously, when somebody calls in, they're calling into the customers, they're calling into either Volkers or into our customer service team. But what we're doing is we're trying to get, again, all these calls to go to the right places. So obviously the resident gets the best journey. So rather than if they want to speak to the NSL or the parking enforcement team, then obviously we're trying to get them over to that team instantly rather than go to Volkers and say, sorry, you got the wrong number, then bounce them back to customer services, and then customer services send them over to NSL. So that's what that's about, is trying to get everybody in the right place so the customer has the best, shortest, quickest journey to get to their resolution or their answer as best as possible.
Okay, thank you. And one sort of final question is, when councillors submit a request, it's generally because we've been poked by a resident that they've not had satisfactory blah, blah, blah. Do you measure the inputs from councillors to calls to see whether they actually get an increase in councillor calls, decrease, and actually if the action has been correct?
So we can, as I say, it depends how it comes in. If sometimes we still get a number of members going directly to staff, which, you know, we're trying to obviously find the right system, and we'll feed that out to you. If they come direct to an officer, then obviously that's hard sometimes to track it. So that's why we're trying to get everything into the CRM system. And then from the CRM system, we obviously can pick up on, so as long as members use their working email address, we can pick up if they're a member or if they're a member of the public, for example. So if they're that, we can obviously split out that data to see how many inquiries are coming through the CRM system. And we can then see if you've been reported back to in time, how quickly it was responded to, how many complaints there have been. And so, yeah, so we can get all that data. It's great if that can come in and go through that system.
Okay, thank you. Pauline.
Just reminded me of something, actually. It would still be really useful to know who the duty officer on call over the weekend is. I sometimes get stuff, just nature of the beast, I think, that is urgent and critical, and trying to use the council on call out of hours service is pretty soul destroying sometimes, and I'm not suggesting we use it all the time, but sometimes it'd be really useful just to know who's actually meant to be dealing with stuff out of hours when it is urgent.
So that we'll have to pick up and have a look at that, Pauline, because that is the out of hours service. We don't have officers on duty. We have emergency officers who are on duty for emergency reasons, and Harry's in the room today, kind of thing. So there's, you know, you get your kind of your bronze, your silvers, and your golds, depending on what it is. But they're not the officers that will be dealing with urgent queries or queries, local natured queries that you're referring to. That is the out of hours office, that the numbers that are provided. Yeah,
it isn't good enough, Chris. You know, if you've got something which is dangerous, you can wait for a long time on the phone and then you don't get a satisfactory response at the end of it. I think we do need a way of dealing with it other than ringing you or George, just for your own sanity.
We'll, yeah, absolutely. We'll take that away because that is the out-of-hours service for everything for the organisation. It's not just the highways out-of-hours service. So we will, we can pick that up and have a look.
Okay, I don't see any recommendations for this one. Just say thank you for the report, Chris and team. So thank you. Okay.
Thank you. No, thanks for having us.
Thank you, Joe. Moving on to the next item, which is the Emergency Response Framework and Adverse Weather Plan. So, I guess that's you, Steve. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll introduce the report and then hand over to Harry Williamson, the Emergency Planning Manager. Really what I wanted to do was just set out a bit of a story for emergency planning to place this report within context. So with emergency planning, it's going through, we're enhancing its role. We're giving it more of a sort of oversight, bringing forward governance and looking at its sort of role and its position within the council as a whole. So we're bringing it more into the council sort of consciousness and making sure it has more of an active role and positions itself well for emergency planning. What does that mean for sort of members? What you will see is over the next sort of year, 18 months, regular and routine reports coming to scrutiny, such as the two key plans that we've got in front of you tonight. So you can see those, understand where that sits within the council structure, the council's responsibilities under the Civil Contingencies Act, and those key sort of plans that we hope that never have to be used and come forward. That will probably take about 18 months to embed that cycle. So plans get reviewed, updated, will come to scrutiny, and then we'll be on that sort of 18-month conveyor belt review and making sure that there's really good sort of governance and oversight of these key plans. And it's also understanding that the role of emergency planning in this respect is one about sort of coordinating, facilitating, supporting the wider council, and reaches out into what we call the Local Resilience Forum, which is the LRF. So that's the police, the fire, the blue light services, the environment agencies, the utility companies and other partner councils should the emergency plan criteria be such. So it's really just to sort of set in that context. So, at Scrutiny, you'll see more of these reports, you'll see more activity about emergency planning as we bring it forward in a sort of a managed and programme way, with hopefully a view that you'll have more confidence in this. We're also supporting that with member training and be bringing that forward in a raft of other areas to sort of bring the service more and position it well. So with that in mind, what we thought we ought to do is we've reviewed two key plans for the council. As you'll see, the emergency response framework and the adverse weather plan are really key. Council's dealing with a lot of issues, especially to do with adverse weather at the moment, whether that be snow, whether that be flooding, whether that we react to that and coordinate with our partners. So it was really important that Scrutiny, have the chance to sort of comment and overview on that. It does feed into the council's statutory responsibilities, and therefore we thought it was appropriate. So we're sort of setting the scene and hopefully giving that contextual overview. I'll hand over to Harry that will take you through the detail of the reports.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve. Thanks everyone for having me here today. So we're a small team, emergency planning. This is two of us. There's myself as the manager, and I've got Zoran Matic as well, who's the officer in our team. The Civil Contingencies Act 2004, I won't go into all the detail. Some of it's in the report, in the actual framework. But one of the obligations, one of our duties, that we have to write and maintain emergency plans. So that's kind of what we brought you today as two of our most key plans, as Steve has outlined. The first one is the emergency response framework, previously known as the major incident plan. And with this, it's more of a evolution, not a sort of revolution of the work that's been done before. It's kind of modernising that work. Quite key is, to summarise it best, is the fact we've gone from a major incident plan to emergency response framework, detailing the fact that actually as a council, how often do we respond to a defined major incident? And thankfully that's not that often. We'll see how many times I jinx myself today by saying that, but thankfully not that often. So it's modernising that and making it more, I think probably demystifying it somewhat as well, by sort of making it a bit more flexible, more scalable, and also kind of changing it from being emergency planning centric to thinking about the fact that all services and even yourselves, we all have that role in emergency preparedness, resilience and response. So kind of opening it up a little bit more. So that's kind of that bit. And then the adverse weather plan, I think, is probably more of a sort of routine update, but actually it's one of our most frequently activated plans, because, I mean, we've opened it quite a few times, haven't we, Steve, this kind of winter alone. And that's triggered by sort of weather warnings, particularly, but also flood warnings, flood alerts, things like that. So it kind of seemed relevant to bring that one along as well. The updates to that have been kind of largely minor. So, for example, it's kind of reflections and lessons identified from sort of recent incidents and recent multi-agency exercises. Yeah, and then as Steve said, it's kind of all part of the, I'm noticing that ongoing continuous improvement feels like a buzzword for today, but that's kind of what we're also doing, emergency planning. So we have a kind of few other items we'll look forward to bringing you in the future, but happy to take questions on the report or the either sort of documents that we brought.
Okay, any questions from anybody? Al.
Yeah, just on the role of councillors. So I don't really know my role is in emergency planning, so should I?
Well, there's some really good local government association guidance, and I've linked it in here, which is unhelpful because you can't obviously click on it, but I'm hoping in the PDF version you can. And there's probably a few places in here where it refers to that. If I can jump to them. Oh yeah, we're looking at that version. Yeah, so there's a kind of three types of kind of leadership, and I think for us though, it's thinking around in that kind of preparedness piece. It's encouraging communities, businesses, partners to get involved in signing up to various warning and informing. So that could be if you're in a flood warning area, getting signed up to the EA's alerts. It can be as simple as taking action when we get the Met Office warning, so sharing those. I think Pauline, to point you out, I think during during the recent flooding, you did a really good job of actually sharing a lot of the emails that we were sharing out, and I think you were sharing the flood warnings and alerts on your local pages, which is great. So it's kind of things like that on a more kind of simple level, if that makes sense. Sort of just conveying those messages that we're providing, sharing messages from partners and things like that. And then in response, it's really kind of, you do have a lot, as we've been talking with Chris, you have people coming into you with sometimes quite complex issues. So it's escalating those into us, and you're such an important intel into the council, into our response groups when we set them up. So just kind of encouraging you to do that and send those into us, and ideally via the routes that we've kind of asked for, because we'll do that kind of comms to you while the emergency is going on. And then the last piece is then recovery. So again, making sure that you're kind of feeding into us kind of what the communities, what the impacts have been, and what support they might need from us and partners in that recovery bit as well. So I think that probably summarises it, but there is a really good, the LGA's guidance is kind of really helpful, and it distills, it goes from sort of exec members through to sort of councillors through to kind of town and parishes as well. So it's really good, quite a good document.
So just to pick up on that, as we develop these plans and they sort of begin to begin to mature. And what we'll also bring forward is member training as well. So we'll be doing formal member training to develop those sorts of skills and equip members with the, you know, the knowledge of what are the right type of questions, where should you be challenging, what is that role, and reach out into your local communities. And we'll be doing that allied with the sort of the gold, silver and bronze training as well for the various emergency responses. You know, the role of members is crucial within emergency planning, as we experienced within the flooding. You know, the ability of the gold, silver and bronze officers to check in with local members, check what the situation is on the ground, get that, you know, get that instant community feedback. Is the confidence in the communities with the councils or its partners' response? Is it not? Should we be doing more? Is it not? You know your communities much, you know, intimately and better than us. So that role. So in short, yes, we will be bringing forward training, and as we sort of go through the, in inverted commas, the conveyor belt of bringing all these changes forward, we'll roll that out in due course. But within, you know, probably within the sort of the summer autumn period of this year.
Polly.
Thank you. Just a very quick question, actually. I couldn't see it in here, but do you have a plan to do a desktop exercise of this with real live people and a scenario or two to see how well it works?
Yes, that'll be the next stage, essentially. So what the plan for this is, so, well, there's kind of two pieces here, isn't there? The adverse weather plan, I would say no, because that's a document, happens all the time, and actually we tested it in October and then in real life. Emergency response framework, yeah, that's the plan. So the intention is that it will get signed off by Susan, as chief exec, and then we'll start doing that familiarisation piece. So we've been doing consultation with services to make sure that they're happy with it and it's robust and accurate, and then exactly that's the next stage.
Yeah, my experience is that the minute you do that, you find all the things that don't quite work, and it's quite good bouncing people with an actual scenario rather than just asking theoretical questions. Try and enact it as if it's actually happening. It really is quite interesting. The second question was, again, coming back to the out of hours service. I think they're your weakest point. Once you get past them to actually talk to people who know what they're doing, if you know what I mean, you can actually get a really good response quite quickly from the expert services. What's the SLA on the out of hours service? Do you measure it? What's the contract say? And is it just that I've had a bad experience and my residents have, and is it improved? Because I don't use it that often. Or is it still a bit of a problem?
Yeah, so we had trying to think what I can say on a public forum. It was a disastrous service before, I'll be honest. So we had a contractor called Carium that we'd been through for quite a few years, and I think it was a cheap and cheerful contract. And when we noticed it was starting to fail, because there were times where calls were taking about 3 hours to come through, and that actually led to the late escalation of issues. So we'd find out quite late on really quite serious emergencies have been occurring. So I think we took very quick action, and that was last year. Now we're with Forest Care, a Bracknell Forest Council supplied contract. It's been working really well. In terms of the SLAs, they hit them very often. I'm happy to sort of to share this with you probably at a later date. But yeah, we have regular meetings with them. It's a very good set. We're very happy with kind of the service that's provided now. But if you have any kind of particular issues, more than happy to feed them back. But in the last year, we've seen a massive improvement. And what's also great is that in terms of our officer time, we're spending a lot less time on complaints, which is great. And it means we have more capacity to do bits of work like this. So, but yeah, we can have that. Definitely can take that away. That's fine.
It'd be really interesting to see the SLAs and the performance against them, please.
We'll bring that forward. And I think it's also quite important just to make sure that we understand the sort of the separation as well. So there's the out of hours, there's the amount of hours emergency call line for the council, which is really important. But then there's an emergency planning response that could be an all different order of business, whether that's through the bronze, silver or gold in that response. And then a different mechanism will kick in as part of the member training that we'll bring forward, you know, we'll make sure that that sort of understanding is sharpened and portrayed better to members. But there can be a differentiation depending on what the incident is that we're dealing with.
Yeah, I think, but our way of, yours might be different, but our way of accessing them is the same. Obviously, the bronze, silver, gold thing is critical incidents and, you know, all that sort of life-threatening stuff and all that sort of thing, whilst the out-of-hours might be your street lights, your traffic lights aren't working and there's a 15-mile queue somewhere. It's not necessarily life-threatening, but it is still important to get it resolved. And both of those go through the same route. It'd be useful to understand the relative performance of that. And I haven't used it recently, so it may be much better.
I think on the SLAs, I would have to caveat it that I can give you the response times in terms of call times. I might struggle a little bit more with the wider piece because it would then require to go to each service and see how they were actioning that piece. So we might have to look at the...
It's just how you get to the service. I mean, my experience of highways is once you get to Volkers, actually they do act quite quickly. It's getting to Volkers that is sometimes the problem, or has been in the past.
Okay, I do have a question. You mentioned about equipment and stuff for storage. I just wondered how that is costed and how it's maintained and all the stuff around that. Because I remember we've gone through the budgetary meetings here, but I don't remember seeing any budget.
In terms of, so I've taken some bits out of this. So before I did have it, this is a public version because the forum that we're in, and there was a sort of visual sensitive version that had a lot more details in, but I've stripped that out. So in that other version, I did have more details of the equipment that we had and where it was stored, but I didn't think it was appropriate necessarily to put it in here. In terms of budget, emergency planning, we have our own budget, and we regularly sort of go in and maintain our own equipment. So that's what I'm doing on Thursday. I'm going down to monitor that stuff and test it and do that that kind of piece. We have a budget against us, and that's kind of.
So, in the introduction to the piece we said about the emergency planning was that sort of facilitated and framework role. So just, you know, that'd be quite important just to remind ourselves of that. So emergency planning would work through highways, would work through adult social care, would work through the Environment Agency, the LRF, the Local Resilience Forum, police, fire, utilities, and coordinate that response. So the budget exists within the council, but it might exist within departmental or service areas. And the EP, the emergency planning response, is to facilitate and coordinate that and make sure that there's a control in mind to the response from the council. But it would reach out. So within highways, it would go into their adverse weather budget to a degree in order to fund that. So it's just key to probably understand that.
So, and going through to the actual maintenance of the equipment, so again, it says storage, and you do have a regular maintenance schedule, etc., etc. Just so you're not going to say, oh, we need a generator, and you pull it out and find out it's not working.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it depends on the equipment we're talking about, but there's a schedule for that and maintenance for that. Yeah.
Sorry, the other one is again with metrics. I know we've had a very wet February. Do you keep metrics of how often you're triggered, especially now with the weather getting more extreme?
No, I don't. No, it depends. It depends on the definition of a trigger, I guess, in terms of a corporate response. Is that kind of what you mean? I can produce that. That's fine. But it's not something I document often.
Just to pick up on that, the scenario that we normally react to is the meteorological office implements an amber weather warning. So that would come in on the forecast. We would probably have 2 to 3 days of advance notice that there's going to be, sort of rain. Take into account the saturated ground, but normally we'd have 2 to 3 days. Our sort of normal response is we pull together a Teams call or meeting of all the key services of the council. So as you would expect, highways, adult social care, partners in customer services, property and premises management, for want of a description. Coordinate what we think the issue is going to be, what the key concerns are we organised, does everybody understand the plans, how often should we meet? So we use a phrase in inverted commas called the battle rhythm. So what's the frequency of meetings, what updates do we need, and then we would roll that out then over the days and the weekend to come. So when we had the recent flooding that was quite severe, we were meeting sort of 3 times a day over the weekend to make sure that that was coordinated, that all partners were informed, where we had power outages at certain villages that the utilities companies were in. So we tend to scale up or down the response, but normally for adverse weather, the trigger is an amber weather warning, and then we decide should we react, should we just sort of have a watching role and decide our appropriate response. And hopefully we get that right all of the time, but I'm sure there'll be days.
Sorry, Pauline, I think really the intent of my question is to see how much work you're doing and actually publicising the work, because again, I'm really not aware of, okay, you've got to go and trigger through adult social services, so you make sure they're okay and so forth. But it'd be interesting from a public point of view, what your council does for you is actually we do all this emergency planning.
I think it's also, I think Steve's described it wonderfully there, and that's the larger corporate side, but in terms of our team being triggered, it's probably more frequent than that as well, but it's that kind of scalable. So I think if we did that, we'd have to just look at the sort of how we defined it, but sure, take that way.
I think really for a community, it's sort of a perception, isn't it? You know, so there's emergency plan response, adverse weather, flooding. At the end of that, when the dust has settled, did that community feel that it was well managed? Did it feel as if it was communicated? Did it feel that the council had reached into that community to support its residents? Did the member feel as if, you know, the sort of public representative, well informed and able to respond to residents' questions? And if the answers to that is by and large yes, then the service has done its job. So it's in that sort of perception really, and moving to give us confidence that we can do that, you know, as many times as possible with reliability.
Pauline,
Thinking back to past things that have happened, do you have a business continuity plan for loss of the IT system in the council? That means that you can still do your emergency responses without it?
Yes, so business continuity, that's something we want to bring in the future because it's the same but different in a way. So business continuity, the way that we run that is that the different services have their own service level plans, and we do have some sort of overarching corporate sort of guidance on how that kind of works. So each service will set out how they would do their critical work without IT and what that would look like. So quite often, for many of them, if IT does go down, we come to shoot end because that is the most sensible option to do. One of the improvement works we're doing is actually making sure we have a greater corporate business continuity plan so that each service level plan fits together and works up into that one, because there's kind of no point one service saying we would do this, we would do that, and actually IT turn around and go, well, that's not how it works. So having that steer. There is also a major IT event plan, which I think I have referenced in here somewhere, which is more the sort of technical side of it, and that sits with the IT team and how they would respond to that element. But in terms of the business continuity bit, yes, but we want to sort of improve on that too.
So you could operate this emergency response framework without any IT?
Yes, as long as everyone, loss of IT is we have other ways that we could communicate with people to then bring them into the office, and then you'd run this off the hard copies. So yeah, and it's one element we'll be exercising next year as well and testing that out.
Yeah, okay, thank you, because I was just thinking there's a couple of occasions where that's happened, and in the past I remember a council losing its entire office as well, so that might be one that you want to plan as well.
And I mean, that it's a really pertinent point, the reliability on IT. So, you know, going back to the sort of the story that we, you know, tried to roll out at the beginning. As we go through the months, you'll see more of these plans coming in front of you, and then you'll be able to sort of see how this sort of all knits together as we gain sort of momentum and progress along this path. So you'll see those coming, and that will give you greater confidence in the future as well.
Marie-Louise. It was Norman first.
Oh, yes,
Sorry.
I thought that.
My apologies, Norman.
Okay, couple of points. First one, very minor one, but the last time that we did training on this, it was very poorly attended by members, very poorly attended. So try and make it sound exciting so that you get members to come along, because it is an important issue. That's one. The other one is when I was the executive member, I was worried about, getting a phone call in the middle of the night or whatever. When do you escalate things to the executive member or the leader of the council and so on? I always have in mind, it's a very tragic example, but the Grenfell Tower, the media were pursuing people in the middle of the night, and if your executive member or your leader of the council or your chief executive was not aware of what was going on, something of that magnitude, they were going to get persecuted, So how do you decide when you're going to escalate things and involve executive members?
So I think that's where we talk about the bronze, silver and gold. Those are those elements. So bronze being operational and the officers kind of doing the work on the ground. Silver for us is assistant directors. So something that we brought in, I think since June last year, we had a bit of a gap. We didn't have any assistant directors on duty, which we do now. And the reason why that's a really great thing for us at the council is that they are the exact right people to make that decision. Whereas before it was kind of sat at bronze level, which isn't something they would do on a day-to-day basis. By having an assistant director, they have that kind of transferable skills to know when to go, this feels uncomfortable, this is when we should be escalating to gold. So they're the right people to do that, and we regularly sort of train and exercise them. And then in terms of gold, we have sort of their contact numbers, and they're all very happy to be reached out of hours for that sort of purpose. And they would then look to understand, okay, when do we start going to exec members and councillors in that kind of scenario? But then equally, I'm pretty sure when we did the flooding from Storm Henk, we were kind of having those conversations, you were kind of getting those more regular updates. But in terms of that a Grenfell example, we would kind of go through our sort of silver gold chain to decide that. In terms of decision making, the other bit we've got in here to try and provide some consistency, which is hard, because the reason we've called it a framework is you don't get all the answers in here, you have to train it into people. But we've kind of created incident levels, the idea being that we all look at risk differently. A risk to you might be different to me, so it's trying to have that shared understanding. So by having these kind of incident levels, it's to sort of encourage people to be working off that same hint sheet and go, well, actually, a significant incident is impacting multiple council services and activating multiple plans. Well, in that case, I should start thinking around doing these other actions. So it's trying to build that in so that we all kind of are thinking along the same lines. But, that's hard to do without kind of, you can only kind of encourage that through training and skills.
So again, part of the flight path that we're on with emergency planning is that we've already done training of bronze and silver. Everybody that's on that group has been trained. We've also done training as well at gold level, and we will continue to do that as we go. And also with those sorts of scenarios and exercises that were raised earlier. So that will be done in parallel with the members' briefing. So we'll sharpen up those sort of skills and those responses, and also provide those people with the confidence to make those calls in the middle of the night. Should that be the case?
Okay, Giorgio, you want to say something?
Well, I think probably Steve and Harry have said it, but just in terms of practice, we referred to Storm Henk earlier on that weekend when I was gold at that weekend, and a constant conversation between us was, where are we with the lead member, where are we with the leader, where are we with local ward members, and how are we communicating? And that's a constant conversation of check and balance between us to make sure we get that right. And I think in terms of our practice and experience, it's always best to engage rather than not. So if in doubt and asking ourselves, engage. I'm sure members in this room and I'm sure our leadership would want to be engaged, even if that's perhaps a little bit premature, but would rather be engaged early rather than too late. And I think our Storm Henk experience was a good example of how that worked in practice.
Right, I've got Mary Louise.
Yes, thank you. Well, you know what I'm going to say, because I say the same thing always, but it's in these frameworks, it's really important that we keep banging away at the role of the council and these other parties in supporting the community, not directing the community, which, you know, these frameworks still seem to provide. That the communication seems to be very much top downwards, yeah? I mean, it's interesting where the information, what system, key to resilience, one would say, is to have a system where you get communication up, because that is what's going to guide your response. And it's a common response in emergency planning to have these kind of lateral frameworks, because that's what people feel comfortable with. The problem is then, you know, no plan survives contact with reality. How you actually deal on the ground. And Grenfell is an excellent example of that, because part of the problem that the council, specifically the council, faced was its inability to engage with the response on the ground, with the rapidly evolving, you know, because of the breakdown of its relationship with the Tenant Management Committee, but also with the new kind of actors that were on the ground. So I would really urge that you include in these frameworks a way, you know, and a recognition of the importance of not just maintaining top-down communication with the community, but actually identifying and engaging with the emerging ones, yeah, because that's always. And the other point I would like to, because it's always important, the other is about the identification of the vulnerable, because this is a very sticky point in all disaster management issues, because the thing about what we perceive as vulnerable people is that they're really good at surviving. They have to be, because of the extremely difficult situation they face themselves in. So they find themselves in every day. So, you know, vulnerability in an emergency is quite often very different to vulnerability in, you know, late capitalism, as it were. But those 2 points.
So I think the points that you made are really, really valid and pertinent. Within the emergency planning framework, well, it is a planning framework. So we will need plans, and, you know, they will need to be there, and they will need to be rehearsed, and they will need to be planned. And you're right, first contact with the enemy and all that goes with that. What undersits a plan, though, is behaviours, isn't it? It's behaviours, and it's the approach, and it's emotional intelligence. And certainly, you know, while I'm the interim assistant director for emergency planning, we will reach out to members, we will inform members, we will tell them in advance. We might tell them, as George says, a bit too early. We might tell them slightly the wrong thing, but we'll correct that. But we need to reach out to members so we understand what is happening at those in communities, and we understand with our response is calibrated well, is overshot, is undercooked, you know, is being effective. So that will be the behaviour that we push forward, and we'll make sure all of our staff understand that. And then members' ability to sort of feedback. Going back to the earlier comment, we should leave that sort of event, you know, with a sense of we've given you a bit of confidence, with a bit of, you know, we might have been under pressure and there might have been some issues, but overall, you know, you were reassured and there's a good job, and there was confidence in, you know, the service's ability to respond. So it's in the behaviours that we'll bring forward, but we'll make sure that that's clearly understood.
And just on the general sort of community resilience as then more as a concept. We are meeting with town and parish clerks on May 22nd, I think, top of my head, and we're going to start that kind of somewhat of a process with them around flood wardens, community wardens. Some have them, some don't. Some town and parishes have emergency plans, some do, some don't. There's that a bit of discrepancy and inconsistency, so we're going to start that journey with them, and that'll be one of the ways we can get information up, because some, like Charville, have good flood wardens, Swallowfield have good flood wardens. Some areas aren't as impacted by flood, which is great, but there probably are other issues and other emergencies, and so it's kind of thinking what that warden, community warden, kind of looks like as a volunteer role. So we'll be starting that a little bit in May, and then the ID vulnerable people. I started to put a definition for vulnerability in here, and I don't know if I did or not in the end. But you're right; you can't do it because we talk around some of the plans we have as a local resilience forum are loss of power for a week or loss of water for a week. Aren't we all vulnerable if we have no water for a week? Yes, we are. So it's very hard. It's a very hard thing to define. So yeah, I think so just thank you for your points. And I think we said before when we had the member training that when we get to some of these points around community resilience, particularly because at the moment in time the priorities have been making sure we're sort of meeting our statutory responsibilities, and this is kind of this piece of work and other pieces. But for me, I'd be quite keen and quite passionate to start doing that over and beyond piece, which is that community resilience bit. It shouldn't be, but it is in terms of statutory duties. So we'd welcome to kind of have your ear and your support with that, because I think we talked around before with your experience with the Red Cross. I think I'm right in remembering was really valuable. So yeah.
One of the improvements, one of the enhancements that we'll be bringing forward, so that in 18 months or this time next year, you'll see the adverse weather plan revised and refreshed. We'll be able to say that we've held meetings with local flood wardens, we've engaged with them. How was the flooding for you? Did it work? What was the council? Did you have access to any information? Did you be able to contact us out of hours? What sort of training and development do we need? So that sort of reach into that sort of local flood forum framework and the flood wardens, and how we can sort of work together collaboratively. That will be something that you'll start to see coming through, and it's something that we need to do at pace. So that discussion and that engagement is being arranged as we speak, and will improve as we go, and hopefully you'll hear your local flood wardens feeding that back to you in due course.
Okay, I think we're done with that session. So I'd like to say thank you. With the recommendation is actually one other thing is just come back with some SLA data that was asked for. So any other recommendation we want to make from this committee? No? Okay. So thank you very much for that. Actually, one question. When you do your tabletop review or action plan, or when you're actually going to run it, are you going to open that up to councillors to be attendees to see it in action?
I was just thinking about Norman's point earlier when you said making the attendance training more interesting. I'm more than happy we could run an exercise for yourselves if you wanted to. So you asked for it, you can get it. So we'll test you if you want. And I think that could be really useful. So we could look at doing a bit of a theory session, and then we could kind of exercise it. That's kind of how normally we do those types of things. So we could look at doing that.
Let's give you the scenario.
Sure.
So yes, take that away as a recommendation to come back and with a session to run that. Thank you. So moving on to the next agenda item, which is the work programme.
Yeah, just to say that this is the final meeting of the municipal year, and the action tracker at the end shows the huge amount of business that the committee has gotten through. And we're obviously now starting to look forward to next year. So if members have any thoughts about items which could go on to next year's work programme, could they please contact us in Democratic Services, and we'll feed it into the process. So it's as simple as that. Thank you.
Pauline.
Could I just thank Neil? I think we've had a pretty good year in terms of the things we've covered and the discussion. So thank you very much. I think they've been good meetings.
I'll second that, actually. Okay, so does that cover the work programme then? Yes, from your perspective. Okay, so then we go on to the next item, which is the action tracker, which is on page 108 on, no, not on 108, right at the back, 119. So if we just go through that, we've got all the completed items. Anybody got any concerns about the action tracker? No. Actually, I think that's quite reflective of the amount of work that has been done by this committee. Okay, with that, I'll call this meeting to a close. Thank you for the attendance. Thank you, Neil and Liam. Good night.